Welcome back to another lecture. Here we're talking about Native American societies before European contact. That's going to be topic 1.2, and our historical theme in parentheses is going to be geography and the environment. The learning objective is to explain how and why various native populations in the period before European contact interacted with the natural environment in North America. So the first key concept is the spread of maize agriculture from present-day Mexico northward to the present-day American Southwest and beyond supported economic development, settlement, advanced irrigation, and social diversification among societies. The first thing to get to here is the word maize. That means corn. The corn that these native societies used to plant looks very much like the one that you see on the screen. It's very colorful. It would take many centuries and genetic modifications of strains of corn to get it to look like the corn that you and I eat today. Maize cultivation began in Mesoamerica, that's present-day Mexico, with the Aztecs. They're able to establish their large civilization through the use of corn plantations. Remember, their capital city, Tenochtitlan, was built on top of a lake on marshy land, and they utilized that marshy land to create irrigation channels to plant the corn. The little islands that would be created out of these channels in which they would plant were called chinampas, and through the use of these canals and irrigation channels, they were able to feed as many 20 million people across the entire Aztec Empire. The use of corn went up north through North America, reaching the Anasazi or the Pueblo people in modern-day New Mexico. Even as far north as Colorado, we see that the cave dwellers who are using agriculture or planting things like corn into the Mississippi River Valley with the Cahokia mound builders. Here you can see an example of what their civilization used to look like. They are sedentary. It's highly dense in population, and the only way in which you can get that many people living in one area is if you have the ability to feed them. Through the use of irrigation and these infrastructure projects, that became a possibility. We'll talk about the Iroquois a little bit later on in this lecture again, but they adopted Three Sisters farming, and as you can see, one of the main elements of Three Sisters farming is the growing of corn. And since women were generally responsible for the agricultural duties in that society, it elevated their status because of everything that they did to contribute to the livelihood of the tribe as a whole. Next, societies responded to the aridity of the Great Basin and the grasslands of the Western Great Plains by developing largely mobile lifestyles. The first thing we need to establish here is exactly where the Great Basin and the Great Plains are. On the map to the right here, you see that the Great Basin goes as far west as California and Oregon, as far east as Colorado and Wyoming, and then the southern edge is the north of Arizona, and the northern edge is Montana and Idaho. A lot of these places, even today, are still very hot, and so that heat, that warm climate, that lack of rain definitely affected the way in which Native Americans lived in these areas, and so they adopted nomadic lifestyles. Where the Great Salt Lake is now, there used to be a massive lake called Lake Bonneville, which was created as a result of the receding ice caps from the Ice Age. Once it started to dry out is when these groups became more and more nomadic. As there's less rain, there's less water in the area, there's less chance for precipitation, and so they become more nomadic to fill their food needs. You can see in this picture elements of that nomadic lifestyle. The shelter that they're using seems very lightweight, made up of light materials, so that at any moment they could pick up and move to another area. At the same time, they are showing behaviors of people who are sedentary, which means that they are doing things like agriculture. In the picture, they're drying grains that they've grown. So just because societies were nomadic doesn't mean that they didn't practice agriculture. Some of the tribes that you should know in the Great Basin are the Paiute, the Shoshone, and the Utes. The next part of this key concept is the Great Plains. The Great Plains goes as far north as modern-day Canada and as far south as Texas. In the Great Plains, they had a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Again, some of the land was not conducive to agriculture, but there are other resources that Native Americans were able to use. In the northern plains, there were bison. Even before natives had access to horses, even before they had guns with gunpowder, Native Americans were still able to hunt bison. One of the things that they would do is they would slowly herd bison on foot towards an area with a cliff or a bluff. Because bison are very skittish, they would just scare the bison into a stampede, and then not knowing where they were in the heat of the moment, they would run off the cliff, and there'd be no way of stopping because there were bison behind them. As soon as they fell off the cliff, there would be other Native Americans below the cliff waiting for them, and that's when they would strike. In the North Plains, the regions, bison had been an important resource for them before the Europeans arrived. Once the Europeans come in and introduce the use of gunpowder and horses, then their bison hunting is going to increase even further, beginning the decline of the bison populations in the Americas. In the Northeast, the Mississippi River Valley, and along the Atlantic seaboard, some societies developed mixed agriculture and hunter and gatherer economies that favor the development of permanent villages. In the Southeast region, there are a lot more names on the map, which means that there are more people that are settling down. Some of the eastern tribes, like the Creek and the Cherokee, had some of the highest population densities across the entire Southeast, and they did so through the use of Three Sisters farming. In the Northeast, we've talked about the Iroquois. They are the most powerful group up there. They gained dominance through political alliances, and they developed matrilineal societies. That means that once a couple got married, it was the man that would go and live with the woman's family. Hunting would normally be done by the men, and the agriculture would normally be done by the women. Because they were a key part to this part of sustaining the tribe, they in turn got a lot of political power within the group. We also talked about controlled burns in the last lecture. They would burn parts of the forest, and by clearing the forest floor, it made it easier for them to continue to hunt in those areas, and it encouraged the growth of some of those larger trees. On the bottom left, you have an example of an important Iroquois woman. We'll see her in the next historical period. Her name is Molly Brant, and she did a lot to maintain Iroquois sovereignty in the region into the 18th century. On the bottom right, there is an example of how the Iroquois would clear parts of the forest and then have it adapt to their lifestyles. The last region that we're going to talk about is the Northwest and present-day California. Societies in the Northwest and present-day California supported themselves by hunting and gathering. Some areas developed settled communities supported by the vast resources of the ocean. This is another highly dense region, especially in California. California is plentiful in resources and has a great climate. Because of that, California had some of the highest population densities of natives out of the entire North America. There were an estimated 1 million Native Americans in California before European contact. Methods of subsistence included hunting, gathering in the forest, the use of controlled burns to facilitate hunting and encouraging plant growth, fishing in many of the rivers that start from the Sierras going out to the Pacific Ocean. And some of the tribes that you can be familiar with here are the Chumash, the Mono, the Yurok, and the Tillamook. The Tillamook are actually a little bit further up north in Oregon. The picture on the right here is one from the Redwood National Forest. It gives a clear example of the environment that they were living in. There are huge sequoia and redwood trees in Central California and Northern California that would be spotted with marshes in which there would be wildlife that natives could hunt and eat. So finally, a quick recap. Here is the importance of maize, and its effect on native societies is going to be really important. It's what led native societies to grow their populations before Europeans arrived. You have to know the characteristics of all the native groups across the climate and geographic regions of the modern-day United States, and that includes the Great Basin, the Great Plains, the Atlantic Coast, and the Pacific Coast. And finally, you need to know at least one example of a group residing in each region. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, you can click on the video link on the screen. And if you're looking for more practice to help you on the AP exam, you can visit apushslides.com. I wish you the very best in all of your studying, and I hope to see you back on the next lecture.